What is a disability?
The word disabled usually refers to a person who has a physical or mental handicap that keeps him or her from doing certain tasks or makes performing them unusually difficult. Most physical disabilities, like blindness or paralysis, are easily noticed, but many mental disabilities are harder to detect. Mental disabilities can include diseases like schizophrenia, which causes severe disturbances in people's thoughts and emotions. Another category of disability is learning disabilities, like dyslexia, which is a learning disorder that makes reading very difficult because the brain reverses the order of letters and words. A disability can be the result of a disease, an accident, or of genetics, which means that it is a condition that a person is born with. A lot of times disabled people can learn new ways to do things or use special machines or specially trained animals to help them work around their disability. Many disabled people prefer the term differently abled, a description that doesn't divide people into categories like normal and disabled, but addresses the idea that every person has different abilities. In ancient and medieval times, people were frightened of and cruel to those with disabilities. Because those disabilities were not understood, the disabled were ignored or abused. Even today, many people feel uncomfortable or awkward around disabled people staring at them, treating them differently, or even behaving unkindly. Classifying disabled people as different makes it easier for some people to behave in a disrespectful way toward them. But it's important to remember that all people, regardless of whether they have the use of their legs or eyes, or whether they learn quickly or slowly, deserve to be treated with decency.
What is a disability?
The word disabled usually refers to a person who has a physical or mental handicap that keeps him or her from doing certain tasks or makes performing them unusually difficult. Most physical disabilities, like blindness or paralysis, are easily noticed, but many mental disabilities are harder to detect. Mental disabilities can include diseases like schizophrenia, which causes severe disturbances in people's thoughts and emotions. Another category of disability is learning disabilities, like dyslexia, which is a learning disorder that makes reading very difficult because the brain reverses the order of letters and words. A disability can be the result of a disease, an accident, or of genetics, which means that it is a condition that a person is born with. A lot of times disabled people can learn new ways to do things or use special machines or specially trained animals to help them work around their disability. Many disabled people prefer the term differently abled, a description that doesn't divide people into categories like normal and disabled, but addresses the idea that every person has different abilities. In ancient and medieval times, people were frightened of and cruel to those with disabilities. Because those disabilities were not understood, the disabled were ignored or abused. Even today, many people feel uncomfortable or awkward around disabled people staring at them, treating them differently, or even behaving unkindly. Classifying disabled people as different makes it easier for some people to behave in a disrespectful way toward them. But it's important to remember that all people, regardless of whether they have the use of their legs or eyes, or whether they learn quickly or slowly, deserve to be treated with decency.
Why do people go to jail?
One of the jobs of a government is to maintain order among its citizens. It does this by making rules known as laws. Every country has its own unique set of laws. Though there are striking similarities among the legal systems of many nations. Numerous laws involve the protection of people and their property. In democratic societies like the United States, government representatives are elected by the people to write new laws and vote on their passage. Federal law governs all residents of the country, but state and local governments can make their own laws. As long as they don't conflict with federal laws. People who break laws are punished by the government. Laws would be useless if they were not enforced and lawbreakers went unpunished. Ideally, U.S. laws are applied equally to all citizens, rich or poor, black or white, male or female. Many lawyers, judges, and police officers strive for such equality. Though sometimes people harbor prejudices against certain kinds of people or certain ethnic groups without even knowing it. Flaws do exist in the justice system, sometimes, for example, wealthy people who can afford to hire a team of expensive, savvy lawyers get special treatment in the form of lighter punishment or no punishment at all. But many of the people who have sworn to uphold our nation's laws try to do so with fairness and compassion. Regardless of the accused's race, ethnicity, or economic status. In the United States, several laws have been written to protect the rights of someone accused of committing a crime. He or she is considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Someone suspected of a crime is usually arrested and taken into custody by a police officer. Sometimes, in federal cases, for example, the case is presented before a grand jury. A group of citizens who examine the accusations made. The grand jury files an indictment, or a formal charge, if there appears to be enough evidence for a trial. In many criminal cases, however, there is no grand jury. While awaiting trial, the accused may be temporarily released on bail, which is an amount of money meant to guarantee that the person will return for trial instead of leaving the country, or kept in a local jail. Trials are usually held before a judge and a jury of 12 citizens. The government presents its case against the accused person, or defendant, through a district attorney, and another attorney defends the accused. There are strict rules about what can be used as evidence in a trial. Any evidence taken by police as a result of an illegal search of someone's home, for example, cannot be used against the defendant during the trial. If the defendant is judged innocent, he or she is released. If he or she is found guilty of committing a crime, the judge decides the punishment, or sentence, using established guidelines. The lawbreaker may have to pay a fine or go to prison or both.
When were knives, forks, and spoons first used?
While knives have been used as tools, weapons, and even to help in food preparation to carve up large pieces of meat. For example, it wasn't until the Middle Ages, a period ranging from roughly AD 500 to around 1500, that people began regularly using knives to get food from their plates to their mouths. Since forks weren't in use yet, people in that era used knives with narrow blades and pointed ends to spear their food and then eat it. Historians have pointed out that these weapon-like utensils gave the dinner hour the potential for serious violence. In the late 1600s, table knives became blunter and wider, a shape that made them more useful in catching the food that sometimes fell off forks and spoons. People have been using spoons for centuries, and these helpful scoopers were probably among the first eating tools developed by early humans. In prehistoric times, spoons were made of curved pieces of shells or wood. During the Middle Ages, royal and wealthy citizens used spoons made of precious metals like gold and silver. Common folks had to make do with tin or pewter spoons. As eating instruments, forks are the latecomers in the utensil world. While the ancient Greeks used two-tined forks to stabilize food they were carving and serving, and table forks were used by the wealthy in the Middle East and other countries in what is now Eastern Europe. The concept of table forks did not become widespread in Western Europe until the 16th and 17th centuries. At first, people didn't understand the need for a fork. They had spoons and knives and, of course, their hands, to pick up food. But forks came to be popular symbols of social status among the wealthy. And eventually the general population came to accept their use as well. Another kind of utensil, chopsticks, came into being around 5,000 years ago in China. Historians believe chopsticks evolved from twigs people used to grab pieces of food out of large cooking pots. Over time, these twigs were carved into sticks that worked well when picking up small pieces of food. By AD 500, chopsticks had spread to other Asian countries, with some differences among them in style and size.
What is a best friend?
A best friend is a special pal who generally likes to do a lot of the same things you like. You tend to have more fun with your best friend than with other friends. And you can tell him or her more of your feelings, even secrets, because you trust that person more than anyone else. And your best friend feels the same way about you, Sharing important ideas and feelings. It seems like your best friend understands you better than any other person you know. You care about each other a great deal. You share your good times and bad times with a best friend, and that person does the same with you.
Why can't I take things that aren't mine?
People can only get along together when they show care and respect for each other. Likewise, people must show care and respect for the property of others. History has shown us through its wars and invasions what chaos can be created when people take by force what isn't theirs. Everyone has personal possessions that mean a lot to them. When you take something that belongs to someone else without asking, or without paying for it, it is considered stealing, and it is wrong. Grown-ups who do serious stealing end up in jail. No matter how much you want something, it is never okay to steal. Just think how bad you would feel if someone took something special that belonged to you. A lot of times you can borrow something that belongs to another person if he or she gives you permission. Take good care of the item, then, and don't forget to return it. Also be prepared to replace the item if you lose or ruin it. That is part of the deal when you borrow something. And remember, you can't expect other people to share their things with you if you don't share your things with them. When you are generous, others tend to be generous back. Sharing with one another is a great way to use and enjoy more things than you could own yourself. And everybody benefits.
What do the stars and stripes on the United States flag mean?
When the first United States flag was adopted in 1777, it had 13 alternating red and white stripes. 7 red, 6 white, and, in the upper left portion, 13 white stars on a blue background. The number 13 was chosen because that was the number of original states that formed the United States. For several years after that design was adopted, a new stripe and a new star were added each time a new state joined the Union. But in 1818 Congress decided to keep the number of stripes at 13 and simply add a new star for each new state. The U.S. flag has several nicknames: the Stars and Stripes, the Star-Spangled Banner, and Old Glory. At the time the U.S. flag was designed, the stars and stripes, and the colors of each, were given no specific meaning. The ideas for the design most likely were based on other countries' flags. In 1782, when the national seal was designed and the flag was incorporated into it, national leaders decided that each color and symbol should have a meaning. As reported in the book Our Flag, published by the U.S. House of Representatives in 1989. It was decided that red symbolized hardiness, strength and valor, bravery. White symbolized purity and innocence, and blue represented vigilance, perseverance, and justice. It has also been said that the stars are symbols of the heavens, and the stripes represent rays of light coming from the sun.
What does adopted mean?
Sometimes children cannot be raised by the women and men responsible for their births, their natural, or birth, parents. This situation arises for many reasons. The parents may be too ill or may have died. Or they may feel that they are too young or too poor to raise children properly. Happily, many couples, or single women and men, want to raise the children of such parents as their own. When a child is legally adopted, the law recognizes that the new parent or parents and the child are connected in the same ways that natural children are connected with their parents, sharing the same rights and duties. Once a child is adopted, his or her birth parents lose all legal control over that child. What the law doesn't state, but what every adopted child knows, is that the love shared with an adoptive parent is the same too.
What is a test tube baby?
Sometimes, a man and a woman who want to have a baby have trouble conceiving. Many factors can contribute to a fertility problem, and sometimes medical science can help fix it. One solution to infertility is something called in vitro fertilization. With this method, a woman's eggs are fertilized with a man's sperm outside the woman's body. Fertilization takes place in a laboratory, in a glass dish, not really in a test tube. Once fertilization occurs there and the fertilized eggs begin to grow, they are placed inside the woman's uterus to develop further. Eventually a baby is born, sometimes multiple babies are born if more. Then one of the fertilized eggs attaches to the uterus and develops fully. Kids who originate from this method of fertilization are no different from other kids. They are simply children who began their lives outside their mother's bodies.
Why do clothes for men and women have their buttons on different sides?
Most people, about 90%, are right-handed, and it is easiest for them to button their clothes from left to right, which is the way that men's buttons are arranged.
What do AM and PM mean?
The abbreviation AM stands for the Latin phrase ante meridiem, which means before noon. PM stands for post meridiem, which means afternoon. Meridian, the English spelling, which used to mean midday. refers to an imaginary line that would appear if you could draw a line from the North Pole to the South Pole. The terms came into use in ancient Rome, when the movements of the sun were used to measure time. At 3 points during the day: when the sun rose, when the sun set, and when the sun was directly overhead at midday. It was easy enough for the Romans to determine the time. So they divided the period of daylight into 2 parts: the period of time before midday, AM, and the period of time after, PM.
What do the letters on M and M candies stand for?
During the 1940s, when M&M candies were first introduced, 2 men headed the company that made them. Mr. Mars and Mr. Murray ran the M&M Candies Company, which has since become Mars Incorporated. And they put the initials of their last names on the colorful treats. The letters used to be printed on the candies in black, but since 1954 the MS have been white.
Can adopted children find their birth parents?
In many adoption cases, the identities of a child's birth parents are kept secret. This practice is meant as a protection for all individuals involved. It allows the natural parents to go on with their lives without having contact, which could be very painful, with the child or children they gave up. The adoptive parent or parents and adopted child can build a new life together and form loving bonds without the interference of a natural parent. But as adopted children grow up, some feel a strong need to get to know their natural parents, particularly their mothers, and to learn the circumstances surrounding their births. In many parts of the United States, an adopted person who is at least 18 years old can find out some information about his or her birth parents, things that wouldn't give away the parents' identities, like medical history, ethnic origin, and religion from hospital and adoption records. An adopted person can also locate his or her birth mother through a reunion agency, but only if the parent has put her name on a list to be contacted. Locating a biological father can be more difficult if the father was not involved in the life of the birth mother when she put her child up for adoption. She may not have given the agency any information about him.
Why was the Statue of Liberty built?
The Statue of Liberty, officially named Liberty Enlightening the World and sometimes referred to as Lady Liberty, was built in the late 1800s as a symbol of the friendship between France and the United States. France had supported American efforts to gain independence from England in the 1770s. And the United States had returned the favor during France's Revolution of the 1780s and 1790s. A joint effort between the two nations, the statue was designed and built in France, while the 154-foot, 47-meter, concrete pedestal was the responsibility of the Americans. intended as a gift to celebrate the 100-year anniversary, or centennial, of American independence, which happened in 1776. The statue was designed by sculptor Frederick Augusta Bartholdi. He had help from many engineers and designers, including Alexander Gustave Eiffel, the man who designed the Eiffel Tower in Paris, France. Lack of funds in both countries slowed down the construction of the statue, and it wasn't actually completed until 1884, 8 years after the centennial. It took nearly a year for the statue, which was broken down and divided among more than 200 crates, to travel across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States. And it was another whole year before the pedestal was completed. Finally, on October 28, 1886, the Statue of Liberty was officially dedicated in front of a crowd of thousands. Made of copper and steel, the statue, which depicts a woman who represents the concept of liberty, stands just over 151 feet, 46 meters, tall, plus the height of the pedestal. To give an idea of just how big the statue is, bear in mind these statistics: her index finger is 8 feet, 2.4 meters, long, her nose is 4.5 feet, 1.4 meters, long, and the width of her mouth is 3 feet, 0.9 meters. Lady Liberty holds a torch in one hand, symbolizing enlightenment or freedom from ignorance. The other hand holds a plaque that bears the date of American independence, July 4, 1776.
Why, then, are the buttons on women's clothing arranged in an opposite way? For fastening from right to left?
Although no one knows for sure, it is believed that the tradition for arranging women's buttons began long ago, when buttons were considered very fine ornaments, made of silver, gold, and jewels. Women who could afford many fine clothes with beautiful buttons usually had maids who dressed them. It was easier for maids, who were usually right-handed, to help with their mistress's clothing if the buttons that faced them were fastened from left to right. Of course, today, nearly all women dress themselves, and it would make sense if all clothes buttoned with the ease of the right-hander in mind. But the tradition of button arrangement is so old and women are so used to fastening them a certain way that the situation is unlikely to change.
What makes soda pop fizz?
Soda pop gets its fizz from carbon dioxide, a harmless gas that makes up part of the air we breathe. It is mixed into soda pop to make it light and fun to drink. When a soda bottle or can is sealed, the gas can't escape and stays mixed with the beverage. But when soda is opened or poured into a glass, carbon dioxide, which is much lighter than the liquid, rushes to the surface in the form of bubbles and escapes into the air after bursting. Sometimes the bubbles rise so fast, bringing soda pop with them, that they make a frothy, fizzing foam. Soda pop goes flat when it has been left in an open container for a long time and has lost all of its bubbles, or carbonation.
What is a disability?
The word disabled usually refers to a person who has a physical or mental handicap that keeps him or her from doing certain tasks or makes performing them unusually difficult. Most physical disabilities, like blindness or paralysis, are easily noticed, but many mental disabilities are harder to detect. Mental disabilities can include diseases like schizophrenia, which causes severe disturbances in people's thoughts and emotions. Another category of disability is learning disabilities, like dyslexia, which is a learning disorder that makes reading very difficult because the brain reverses the order of letters and words. A disability can be the result of a disease, an accident, or of genetics, which means that it is a condition that a person is born with. A lot of times disabled people can learn new ways to do things or use special machines or specially trained animals to help them work around their disability. Many disabled people prefer the term differently abled, a description that doesn't divide people into categories like normal and disabled, but addresses the idea that every person has different abilities. In ancient and medieval times, people were frightened of and cruel to those with disabilities. Because those disabilities were not understood, the disabled were ignored or abused. Even today, many people feel uncomfortable or awkward around disabled people staring at them, treating them differently, or even behaving unkindly. Classifying disabled people as different makes it easier for some people to behave in a disrespectful way toward them. But it's important to remember that all people, regardless of whether they have the use of their legs or eyes, or whether they learn quickly or slowly, deserve to be treated with decency.
Why do women in some countries wear veils?
A veil is a piece of cloth that is usually worn to hide a person's hair or face. Women have worn such veils since ancient times, mostly in Middle Eastern countries, primarily for the purpose of keeping men from looking at them. Many women of the Muslim faith still wear veils of some type when they are out in public. In some Muslim countries, only a woman's eyes are allowed to show. Although Westerners, people from North America and Western Europe, may find these veils symbolic of women's restricted freedoms in many Muslim societies, Muslim women wear them to honor long-held traditions of modesty and to show respect for their religion and the men in their lives.
Why is the bald eagle the official national symbol of the United States?
In 1782, 6 years after the end of the Revolutionary War, leaders of the newly independent United States were designing a national seal, an image that would appear on official documents and elsewhere. Eventually these men settled on the bald eagle for the Great Seal of the United States. The bald eagle was chosen in part because it was believed to be found only in North America. The bald eagle was also admired for its strength, its noble appearance, and the freedom of its life spent soaring through the sky. While the eagle became an important American symbol when it was adopted for the U.S. seal in 1782. It wasn't until 1787 that it officially became the national emblem. The bald eagle has been used for the official seals of many states, and it has appeared on stamps, currency, or paper money, and several coins, including the quarter. The bald eagle's head is covered with white feathers.
Why can't babies do anything?
Try to imagine what it is like to be born. 1 minute you are floating in a warm, dark, quiet world where there is nothing to see, not much to feel, and where you don't even have to eat or breathe on your own, it's all done for you, with nutrition and oxygen reaching you through a special tube called an umbilical cord that connects you to your mother. Then all at once you arrive in an unknown world, as strange as any planet in outer space. Suddenly, air touches your skin and feels warm or cold. Loud sounds, and light, and strange-looking creatures and objects surround you. You have to breathe at once in order to survive. You experience hunger for the first time and will soon have to learn how to eat, too. It takes a long time for a newborn to learn about his or her new world. Human babies are born with instincts and reflexes that help them survive, just like other baby animals. But they have no knowledge or experience about the complex world of people into which they arrive. So don't be impatient with babies, they have everything to learn. Making the learning process twice as hard is the fact that human babies are not fully developed when they are born. In nature, less complex life forms like insects, for instance, can move about and get their own food as soon as they are hatched. But the young of higher forms of life and humans are at the top take many years before they are physically mature. People grow until they are between the ages of 18 and 20 years old, with body changes occurring very quickly in the early years. And because the human brain is so complex, mental growth continues throughout a lifetime. During much of their lives, then, children must be fed, cared for, and taught by adults. So when newborns start out, their bodies aren't even ready for the demands of their new world. They can't see very well at first, especially things that are far away. They don't know how to use their arms and legs much. For a while they can't even grasp things with their hands. The digestive systems of newborns are immature, too, and babies don't have teeth. Unable to eat solid foods, they depend on breast milk or baby formula for all their nutrition. And sometimes they can't even keep that in their stomachs, spitting up a lot. Most frustrating of all for everyone, including the baby, is the fact that babies are unable to talk at first. And the only way they can communicate their feelings or needs is to cry.
What kind of government does the United States have?
While many people describe the form of government in the United States as a democracy, it is technically defined as a federal republic. Federal means that the individual states have some power, but that a central national government has authority over them. Republics and democracies are, in fact, very similar, and in some cases, interchangeable. In a republic, the people have the power to elect leaders who govern according to a set of laws. In the United States, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights lay the groundwork for all laws that follow. That definition is very close to that of a kind of government called constitutional democracy. In that type of government, people exercise political power by electing leaders. These leaders, and the citizens of the country, are bound by a set of laws that guarantee certain freedoms, like the right to speak freely or practice any religion. While the U.S. government may be defined as a republic, many of its governmental processes are democratic in spirit.
What makes holes in Swiss cheese?
Enzymes, complex proteins, special bacteria, and molds are added to milk to make cheese. These different additives give cheeses their distinctive looks and tastes. The bacteria that are used to make Swiss cheese remain active for an especially long time. These bacteria turn milk sugars into gas long after the cheese has developed its firm outer covering or rind. Because the gas can't escape at that point, it gathers in pockets as the cheese continues to ripen inside, creating bubbles, which look like holes when the cheese is sliced.
What is an uncle?
An uncle is the brother of your mother or father. He can also be the man who marries your mother or father's sister. You may also know a man who is not related to you, a close family friend who loves and encourages you. For example, that you refer to as your uncle.
How did we get the United States national anthem?
In September 1814, the United States and Great Britain were in the midst of fighting what is known as the War of 1812. The British had taken over Washington, D.C., and planned to attack Baltimore, Maryland. A few American citizens, including a lawyer and poet named Francis Scott Key, approached the British fleet, which was anchored in Chesapeake Bay, to request the release of an American who had been taken prisoner. The British agreed to let the prisoner and the others return to American shores. But their return had to wait until the British were done attacking Fort McHenry, which was defending Baltimore. Throughout the night of September 13 to 14, Key heard the explosions of the battle. Anxiously awaiting morning to see whether the Americans had won the battle. In the early morning light, Key could see that Fort McHenry's enormous American flag was still waving, indicating that the Americans had been triumphant. Relieved and inspired by the sight, Key composed a poem called Defense of Fort McHenry.
If you want people to be nice to you, and who doesn't?
Then it is wise to be nice to them. Courteous, kind behavior not only makes the people you're dealing with feel good, it can make you feel good too. You've probably noticed that being nice is contagious, spreading good feelings to lots of people. Not only that, but you'll find you get what you want a lot more often when you're behaving pleasantly than if you're whining or ordering people around. Imagine if each person made the effort to be more respectful and thoughtful, the whole world would run a lot more smoothly.
Why did soldiers once wear armor?
Since ancient times, soldiers have worn special clothing or armor to protect themselves during warfare. Hard materials like leather, wood, shells, and even woven reeds were used to give soldiers extra protection against enemy arrows. Metal started to be used for armor about 3,500 years ago, by warriors in the Middle East. By the time of the ancient Greeks. About 1,000 years later, soldiers were well protected, wearing large pieces of metal on their chests and backs, shin guards and metal helmets, and they carried metal shields. Soon armored clothing, garments with metal strips and plates attached, began to be made for soldiers. Then chain mail, a type of metal cloth, was developed. Made of small metal rings linked together, chain mail was much more flexible than metal plates, but could not withstand the force of larger weapons, like lances. So full suits of armor made of steel plates, hinged at the knees and the elbows, came into use around the 14th century. Soldiers were covered with steel from head to toe, with heavy metal helmets covering their faces, heads, and necks. A warrior could see and breathe through small slits or openings in the helmet's visor. A movable metal flap that could be lifted up. Only important or wealthy warriors could afford this kind of elaborate armor. Suits of armor weighed so much that the soldiers or knights who wore them usually couldn't move around in them very well. They wore such armor mostly when they fought on horseback. Even the horses sometimes wore armor. As the methods and weapons of warfare changed, clumsy personal armor was no longer useful. It became far more important for soldiers to be able to move quickly and easily. Today's soldiers usually wear cloth uniforms and steel helmets. But armor is used on war vehicles like tanks, naval vessels, and aircraft. The bulletproof vests that police officers use are also a type of armor.
Why do soldiers salute one another?
It is believed that the tradition of saluting raising the right hand to the forehead got its start many centuries ago. During the time when knights fought in full suits of armor. When two knights met, they had to raise the visors on their metal helmets to identify themselves and to see if they were friends or enemies. The motion associated with lifting the visor continued when two fighting men met. Even when soldiers no longer wore armor. This behavior turned into the salute. The salute became a sign of recognition and respect. Used especially by military men and women when in the presence of a military superior, someone who ranks above them.
Why do we have daylight saving time?
Daylight saving time, DST, came about as a way to adjust clocks during the summer months. When days are longer, to make better use of the daylight hours. Countries began making such clock adjustments during World War I. 1914 to 1918, to save on the fuel needed for artificial light. If people could adjust their clocks so that it got dark at 9 p.m. instead of 8 p.m., then they could turn their lights on 1 hour later, or not at all if they simply went to bed when it got dark. These energy savings have continued today since it gets dark later in the evening. People don't turn on lights until later in the day. And in the summer, the sun rises very early and is usually up when people awake, reducing the need to turn on lights first thing in the morning. In the fall, as the days begin to get shorter, we go back to standard time, which means that the sun sets and rises at an earlier time of day. As the days get shorter, the amount of time between sunrise and sunset shrinks, so that in the heart of winter daylight arrives later in the day and departs earlier than in the spring and summer months. In the United States, daylight saving time, as decided by Congress, begins at 2 a.m. on the first Sunday in April and ends at 2 a.m. on the last Sunday in October, when DST begins. People move their clocks forward 1 hour, when it ends in October, clocks are moved back 1 hour. If you have trouble remembering which direction the clocks should go at which time of year, just think of the expression spring forward, fall back. Many other countries in the world observe some form of daylight saving time, though the exact starting and ending dates differ.
Why do most cereals make crackling noises when you pour milk on them?
Most cereals are made by baking grain mixtures, made from rice, corn, wheat, or oats, that have been formed into bite-sized pieces. During the baking process, these pieces expand, causing tiny holes or cavities to form on their surfaces. When milk is poured onto cereal, it flows over these holes and traps air inside. As the milk starts to soak into the cereal, it forces the air out and fills up the tiny holes. So, the crackling noise you hear coming from your bowl is actually air being released from your cereal.
What did people use before toothbrushes were invented?
Early in human history, people used anything that they could find to keep their teeth clean. Usually a thin, sharp object, like a stick, was used to pick out food left between teeth. Chewing on the end of certain sticks would fray the wood, making a kind of brush, which could then be rubbed across the teeth. Even today, members of primitive tribes chew sticks to keep their teeth clean. The constant chewing produces more saliva than usual, which helps wash food away. Later, people found that if they rubbed abrasive elements, like salt or chalk, across their teeth, they could get rid of grime. They also used water and pieces of rough cloth to clean their teeth. Toothpicks made of all kinds of materials also became popular. Rich people had jeweled toothpicks made of gold and silver. Toothbrushes for the wealthy, with fancy handles and hog bristles, came into use in the 18th century. Only much later, when cheaper, wooden-handled toothbrushes were made, and the importance of good dental hygiene became known, did most people start to regularly use them.
Why do I have to be nice to people?
With billions of people crowded onto one planet, it is critical that we treat each other with basic decency and respect so we can get along with one another. One basic rule of behavior, called the Golden Rule, has helped people do this, century after century. That rule states that we should treat others in the way we would like to be treated ourselves.
What is an only child?
An only child is a child who has no brothers or sisters. For a long time, parents and experts on raising children worried that only children would not be as well adjusted in adulthood because they had no brothers or sisters to relate to and share things with as they matured. Some people feared that as adults, only children would be antisocial and selfish. But studies have shown that none of this is true, as only children grow up. They share their lives with young friends and relatives. Lots of only children become well-adjusted adults, and many become high achievers.
How did clothing develop?
People first started wearing clothing to keep warm and dry and to protect themselves against the blazing sun, scratching plants, and attacking animals. Early men and women used animal furs as clothing, wrapping them around their waists and shoulders. But since ancient times, clothing has also been a means of expression. A way in which people have let others know more about themselves. Even in prehistoric times, people used dress to indicate which group they belonged to, their status or position within their group or tribe, and as an expression of their customs and religious beliefs. Early men and women used strings of beads or stones, feathers, and other ornaments to make themselves look special and different from one another. Early on, people found that by scraping animal hides and treating them with fats they could make them softer and more flexible. This allowed the skins to be cut, sewn, and shaped into better fitting clothing. Thin strips of leather drawn through holes in the hides kept the pieces together. Finer sewing could be done once sharp needles that could pierce the skins were developed. Starting about 50,000 years ago, these were usually carved from wood or bone. Then people began to make cloth. Cloth is material made from threads that are woven together in a crisscross pattern. About 10,000 years ago, people first made cloth out of animal hair that was spun into thread. When the short hairs of an animal were overlapped and twisted together, long strands could be made, which were then woven into fabric. People in ancient Asia used the hair of sheep, camels, and goats to make cloth. In other parts of the world, people used the hairs of different animals of mountain creatures like llamas and alpacas in South America, and of horses, buffalo, and moose in North America to make their cloth. And it could be colored by using dyes made from certain plants and even animals. In ancient Greece, for example, a rich red dye was made from the skin of the tiny Kermes worm. Ancient Egyptians were some of the first people to make cloth. Beginning around 5000 BC. Instead of using animal hair, the Egyptians wove together the long fibers of flax plants to make lightweight linen, perfect for their desert climate. Historians think that they got the idea for weaving from fishermen, who made nets by tying threads together in a special way with weights attached to their ends to keep them tight, straight, and free from tangling. As centuries passed, clothing continued to be used to express the identity and status of its wearer. The clothes of farmers and tradespeople like blacksmiths and carpenters, for example, remained simple and sturdy. Meant to last a long time, their clothing styles were also loose, making them easy to work in. But wealthy people could afford fine fabrics from faraway places. And they had the luxury of thinking about the way their outfits were shaped and decorated. They could show their higher social status by wearing clothing styles that were sometimes wildly impractical, things that would never be worn by someone who performed manual labor for a living. In the 14th century, for instance, long pointed shoes were in fashion. Some with 20-inch toes that had to be stuffed with moss to keep their shape. A farmer certainly couldn't work in his fields in shoes like that. Immense hanging sleeves and corsets that pinched waists in to make them smaller worn by both men and women are other examples of impractical and uncomfortable fashions.
So why is it called the bald eagle?
Because one meaning of the word bald that is not commonly used anymore refers to white markings. Due to excessive hunting, environmental pollution, and loss of habitat, the bald eagle population became dangerously low at one point, prompting the U.S. Congress to pass a law protecting it. Bald eagles were once listed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as an endangered species, meaning they were close to being extinct. Thanks to the laws protecting it, these birds have rebounded a bit. They are now listed as threatened, which means they are not as close to being extinct as they once were. But their numbers are still few, only about 50,000 in the United States, and it is illegal to hunt them.
What is an ant?
An aunt is the sister of your mother or father. She can also be the woman who marries your mother or father's brother. If your mother and father have many brothers and sisters, you can have a lot of aunts. Sometimes a woman who is not related to you but who helps, advises, and encourages you as an aunt would, is affectionately referred to as your aunt.
Why is the Statue of Liberty such an important symbol of the United States?
The Statue of Liberty stands for many of the nation's most cherished ideals: freedom, equality, and democracy. Perhaps most important to the millions of immigrants for whom the statue was one of their first sights of the United States is the ideal of opportunity, the chance to begin a new life, in a new land. While their lives in the United States were frequently difficult, for millions of immigrants, America offered the chance to escape from grinding poverty and abusive governments in other lands. Standing in the midst of New York Harbor, the point of entry into the United States for so many immigrants arriving on ships from other countries, the Statue of Liberty has been a powerful symbol of opportunity for more than 100 years. A poem called The New Colossus, written by Emma Lazarus, was mounted on the statue's pedestal in the early 1900s. Its famous lines include these words that Lazarus imagined Lady Liberty to be saying: "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me, I lift my lamp beside the golden door."
What are the three branches of the United States government?
When the U.S. Constitution was written in 1787, the people writing it, referred to as the framers of the Constitution, were very concerned with maintaining a balance between the power of the government and the freedoms of the citizens. The framers divided the federal government into three branches: the executive, legislative, and judicial. Each branch has its own separate, unique authority, known as the separation of powers. And each branch is limited by the powers of the other two. This system of checks and balances ensures that no single branch of government has all the control. The executive branch, which is led by the president, also includes the vice president and the cabinet. The cabinet includes the attorney general and such departments as defense, treasury, labor, and agriculture. The legislative branch, called Congress, is responsible for making laws. This branch consists of the Senate and the House of Representatives. The elected officials in these houses can introduce and debate legislation. But as an example of checks and balances, the bills passed in the Senate and House of Representatives can't become laws until they are signed by the President. The President can veto, or reject, a bill, but if enough people in Congress, at least 2/3, vote to override that veto, the bill can become a law without the President's signature. The judicial branch, headed by the Supreme Court and also including the U.S. courts of Appeals and U.S. District Courts, explains the laws passed by the legislative branch and interprets whether these laws follow the principles laid out in the Constitution. The court system performs extremely important functions: resolving arguments between citizens and determining the guilt and possible punishment of people accused of crimes.
What is a cousin?
A first cousin is the child of your uncle or aunt. The term cousin can also refer to other family members to whom you are not as closely related.
Why are some people blind?
Blindness is complete loss of sight. It can happen when certain parts of the eyeballs, the optic nerves, which carry visual signals from the eyes to the brain, or the sight centers of the brain, are damaged. Such damage can occur as a result of injuries or diseases. A person can also be born with eye or brain abnormalities that cause blindness. In many cases, particularly in very poor countries, infectious diseases and poor diets can also cause blindness. A lack of vitamin A, in fact, is the leading cause of blindness worldwide. With basic medicines and proper nutrition, such cases could be prevented. For every one person in the United States who is totally blind, there are 4 others who are visually impaired or legally blind. These people have some ability to see, but they see so poorly even with eyeglasses that they cannot do things that require good vision, like driving a car.
Why are some people blind?
Blindness is complete loss of sight. It can happen when certain parts of the eyeballs, the optic nerves, which carry visual signals from the eyes to the brain, or the sight centers of the brain are damaged. Such damage can occur as a result of injuries or diseases. A person can also be born with eye or brain abnormalities that cause blindness. In many cases, particularly in very poor countries, infectious diseases and poor diets can also cause blindness. A lack of vitamin A, in fact, is the leading cause of blindness worldwide. With basic medicines and proper nutrition, such cases could be prevented. For every one person in the United States who is totally blind, there are 4 others who are visually impaired or legally blind. These people have some ability to see, but they see so poorly even with eyeglasses that they cannot do things that require good vision, like driving a car.
How do people who are blind get around?
People who are blind rely on their other senses: smell, touch, hearing, taste to help them manage in the world. Blind people have to memorize identifying features, like sounds and smells, of the places that they often go. They also have to pay close attention to where things are located in their homes in order to get around safely. Always putting objects in the same places after use so that they can be found again. Some blind people use canes or guide dogs to get around. A white cane indicates that the person using it is visually impaired. Blind people tap their canes on sidewalks, floors, and streets. They learn to identify the locations of things like steps, walls, or doors simply by the different sounds that their cane taps make. Various high-tech devices have been invented, including laser canes, that use sound or light waves that bounce off objects and send signals to the user about where these objects are located, what they might be made of, and how big they are. Guide dogs, or seeing eye dogs, are specially trained to lead blind people about. The dog and the person work as a team, with the dog following commands that help the blind person go about her day. The dog, in turn, signals the person when she is approaching a curb or when it is safe to cross a street.
How do people who are blind get around?
People who are blind rely on their other senses: smell, touch, hearing, taste to help them manage in the world. Blind people have to memorize identifying features, like sounds and smells, of the places that they often go. They also have to pay close attention to where things are located in their homes in order to get around safely. Always putting objects in the same places after use so that they can be found again. Some blind people use canes or guide dogs to get around. A white cane indicates that the person using it is visually impaired. Blind people tap their canes on sidewalks, floors, and streets. They learn to identify the locations of things like steps, walls, or doors simply by the different sounds that their cane taps make. Various high-tech devices have been invented, including laser canes, that use sound or light waves that bounce off objects and send signals to the user about where these objects are located, what they might be made of, and how big they are. Guide dogs, or seeing eye dogs, are specially trained to lead blind people about. The dog and the person work as a team, with the dog following commands that help the blind person go about her day. The dog, in turn, signals the person when she is approaching a curb or when it is safe to cross a street.
How can blind people read books?
Many blind people read specially printed books using the Braille system. Developed by a French boy named Louis Braille in 1824. Braille, who became blind when he was 3 years old, was only 15 when he modified a code used by the military for reading in the dark. Braille's new system involved raised dots that stood for letters, numbers, punctuation symbols, and words. There are 63 characters in the Braille code, each one a unique combination of 1 to 6 raised dots. Once blind people have learned the Braille alphabet, they can read Braille books by lightly touching the book's pages with their fingers. Some people who become blind later in life, after having learned to read, prefer to use a system that incorporates the alphabet they are familiar with rather than learning Braille. A device called the optacon can be used with regular books. It enlarges and raises each letter, which the blind person can then feel with her fingers and read. Another way for blind people to discover the content of a book is through talking books, which are recordings of entire books, novels, school books, and so on that can be played back on cassette or compact disc players. Optical scanners are another way to translate printed materials into sounds. These computers scan a page from a book or magazine, and a computer-generated voice reads the material aloud.
How can blind people read books?
Many blind people read specially printed books using the Braille system. Developed by a French boy named Louis Braille in 1824. Braille, who became blind when he was 3 years old, was only 15 when he modified a code used by the military for reading in the dark. Braille's new system involved raised dots that stood for letters, numbers, punctuation symbols, and words. There are 63 characters in the Braille code, each one a unique combination of 1 to 6 raised dots. Once blind people have learned the Braille alphabet. They can read Braille books by lightly touching the book's pages with their fingers. Some people who become blind later in life, after having learned to read, prefer to use a system that incorporates the alphabet they are familiar with rather than learning Braille. A device called the optacon can be used with regular books. It enlarges and raises each letter, which the blind person can then feel with her fingers and read. Another way for blind people to discover the content of a book is through talking books, which are recordings of entire books, novels, school books, and so on that can be played back on cassette or compact disc players. Optical scanners are another way to translate printed materials into sounds. These computers scan a page from a book or magazine, and a computer-generated voice reads the material aloud.
Why can't some people hear?
The inability to hear, or deafness, can occur for many reasons. Some types of hearing loss result from something blocking sound as it travels from the outer ear to the eardrum and the tiny bones in the middle ear. Other types of loss arise from damage or defect to the inner ear or the auditory nerve, which is the nerve that carries sound signals from the inner ear to the brain. Deafness can happen as a result of disease, including severe ear infections, or it can be inherited, with the deafness being apparent at birth or sometimes showing up years later. Injuries and accidents also account for many cases of deafness. Extremely loud noises, like those that come from an explosion, can cause deafness, though that loss of hearing is sometimes temporary. People who work in noisy factories or those who are frequently exposed to very loud music can also develop hearing loss over time. Many people gradually lose some or all of their hearing when they reach old age. But some of those types of hearing loss can be overcome by wearing a hearing aid, which makes noises like speech or music louder.
Why can't some people hear?
The inability to hear, or deafness, can occur for many reasons. Some types of hearing loss result from something blocking sound as it travels from the outer ear to the eardrum and the tiny bones in the middle ear. Other types of loss arise from damage or defect to the inner ear or the auditory nerve, which is the nerve that carries sound signals from the inner ear to the brain. Deafness can happen as a result of disease, including severe ear infections, or it can be inherited, with the deafness being apparent at birth or sometimes showing up years later. Injuries and accidents also account for many cases of deafness. Extremely loud noises, like those that come from an explosion, can cause deafness, though that loss of hearing is sometimes temporary. People who work in noisy factories or those who are frequently exposed to very loud music can also develop hearing loss over time. Many people gradually lose some or all of their hearing when they reach old age. But some of those types of hearing loss can be overcome by wearing a hearing aid, which makes noises like speech or music louder.